The moment I saw Karen wheeling away with my wheelchair, like she was some kind of suburban pirate claiming loot, I knew I was done playing nice with the HOA. My name's Isaiah Preston. I'm a former paramedic, now medically retired after a spinal injury left me needing a wheelchair most days. I live in a quiet cul-de-sac in the Willow Heights community, where the grass is always exactly 3 inches, the fences are all off-white, and the HOA president, Karen herself real name, Loretta Danvers, runs the place like she's queen of the gated kingdom. I moved in 5 years ago, and honestly, I thought it'd be a good place to recover and lay low. But Loretta never liked me. Maybe it was because I refused to attend her ridiculous monthly yard inspections, or maybe because I had a ramp installed without her decor approval. Either way, she made it her personal mission to make my life miserable through passive-aggressive violation letters and fines that came faster than the mailman. But nothing compared to what she did last Friday. It started like any other HOA ambush. I was sitting on my porch, sipping coffee, when I saw Loretta marching up the driveway in her usual beige pantsuit, clipboard in hand, lips stuck in that permanent judgmental pout. "Mr. Preston," she said, without so much as a hello, "we need to talk about your driveway. Your trash cans were visible for a full 20 minutes after pickup yesterday." I blinked. They were behind the bush. My neighbor even saw me move them. "You're reaching, Loretta." Her eyes narrowed. "It's Mrs. Danvers."
"And reaching? No."
"I'm enforcing the standards this neighborhood was built on."
I didn't respond.
I've learned that arguing with Loretta is like yelling into a toilet. You're the only one who ends up flushed. She glanced at my wheelchair ramp and clicked her tongue. "Still haven't painted that to match the trim. Another violation." I shook my head, wheeling back toward the door. Goodbye, Loretta. That should have been the end of it. But the next day, something unbelievable happened. I was inside, working on a model ship, something calming I do with my hands since my legs quit on me when I heard a sound in the driveway. I looked out the window. Loretta was in my wheelchair,
rolling down my driveway.
Not pushing it, not inspecting it, sitting in it like it was a prop in some twisted HOA theater performance. She had her assistant, some lanky guy in a visor named Martin, filming her with his phone. I opened the door. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" She didn't even flinch. "Proving a point, Mr. Preston," she said, still rolling in circles on my concrete. "Your ramp and driveway slope are not HOA compliant. I'm demonstrating how dangerous it is. I've already drafted a full report." "You stole my wheelchair," I shouted. Martin kept recording. "I'm not stealing it, I'm using it," she said with that tone people use when they think they're smarter than everyone around them. "As HOA president, I have a duty to ensure safety and uniformity." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You're trespassing with my medical equipment." "It's not trespassing if I'm doing a community inspection." I could feel my blood pressure spike. "Put it back. Now." She finally stopped and stood up, brushing off her slacks like she'd just done something noble. "Consider yourself cited," she said. Then she left.
Just like that.
Leaving my wheelchair halfway down the sidewalk. I filed a police report that afternoon. But the officer, clearly familiar with Loretta, said, "She's tricky. You'll need proof and a civil case." So that night I installed cameras. Every angle of my property, covered. I started keeping a journal. I dug up every letter, every fine, every out-of-line notice she'd ever sent me. And I called a lawyer. Turns out I had a case. Several, actually. Loretta violated ADA regulations. She trespassed. She tampered with medically necessary equipment. She even, as my lawyer pointed out, committed petty theft. But I wasn't just after justice. I wanted change. The board was full of her puppets, but there was a clause in the HOA charter hardly ever used that allowed for a full leadership vote if a petition from 1/3 of homeowners was submitted with documented grievances. I started knocking on doors. And to my surprise, people listened. Turns out, I wasn't the only one she'd crossed. "She fined me for having a pink flamingo," said Mr. Gutierrez down the street. "On my birthday." "She told my daughter her chalk drawings were graffiti," said Lydia from 2 houses over. "She tried to evict us for hanging an American flag," one veteran growled. I collected signatures. I shared the video of her stealing my chair. I handed out copies of the ADA law she broke. My neighbors were shocked. Some were furious. A few even cried. Within a week, I had enough names. I submitted the petition. Loretta tried to block it, of course. Claimed the signatures weren't valid. Tried to call an emergency board meeting to suspend voting privileges for violators.
My lawyer shut that down fast.
The vote was scheduled 2 weeks from that day. And Loretta? She was about to find out what happens when you mess with the wrong chair-bound neighbor. Because this time, I wasn't just getting even. I was taking over. The day after I filed the leadership vote petition, a notice mysteriously appeared on my door. "Pending suspension of privileges, due to recent behavior deemed hostile, disruptive, and non-compliant with community standards, your access to HOA-sponsored amenities is under review." It wasn't printed on official HOA letterhead. No signature. Just taped to my door like a child's prank. But the timing made it clear. Loretta was panicking. I didn't touch it. My lawyer, Marcy, told me to leave everything exactly as it was. When she arrived that afternoon, she took photos of the notice, then pointed out something I hadn't noticed. The security camera I had mounted by the front door was missing. Not damaged. Not disconnected.
Gone.
Marcy's eyes narrowed. That's theft. And tampering with surveillance? That's a whole other level. We went inside and reviewed the footage from the backup system I'd hidden behind a false panel in the garage. Loretta didn't know about that one. At 2:43 a.m., a figure in a raincoat and baseball cap crept up my driveway. They kept their head low, but the limp and hunched shoulders were unmistakable. Loretta. She reached up, unscrewed the camera, pocketed it, and walked off like it was a bag of groceries. Marcy leaned back in her chair. She's spiraling. This is getting dangerous. Think she's scared of losing control?
I asked.
No, she said. She's scared of what else you might uncover. That night, I got a call from Theo, a quiet guy who lived 3 houses down. He worked maintenance for the HOA, mostly landscaping and seasonal decorations. We'd never spoken much beyond polite waves. "I don't know if I'm supposed to say anything," he said, his voice low, "but I saw something last month." Loretta ordered me to haul a pile of old files to the incinerator bin. They were HOA documents. When I asked why, she just said they were expired compliance forms.
But I saw checks.
Lots of them. Checks. I asked. Refunds. Dated years back. All uncashed. Names I recognized. I think she's been sitting on money owed to people. Might be worth digging. I met Theo the next morning behind the old tool shed near the tennis courts. He handed me a box of old envelopes he said he'd rescued before the rest were destroyed. Dozens of refund notices and reimbursement approvals, none of which had ever been delivered. I cross-referenced names with my petition list. 7 homeowners were on there. All had fines overturned by appeal, yet none had seen a dime returned. Marcy's reaction was immediate. This is misappropriation. She's hoarding money that legally belongs to residents. That's not just unethical, it's criminal. We filed a formal complaint with the state's Department of Consumer Affairs. Marcy also contacted a local investigative reporter she knew from her days handling city council ethics cases. By evening, a news van was parked just outside the community gates. Loretta tried to play it cool. She issued a memo calling the allegations baseless slander fueled by a disgruntled resident with a personal vendetta. She held a closed-door board meeting the next day, except it wasn't as closed as she thought. My neighbor, Janice, had been quietly recording from her purse. She had a seat near the back and a clear line of sight to the board table. We watched the footage at my kitchen table that night. Loretta's voice was sharp, clipped, not the polished tone she used for public events. "We need to delay this vote," she said. "Challenge every signature. Claim procedural errors. If we have to, we'll modify the charter. I've already contacted Leonard at the registry office. He owes me." One of the board members spoke up, a wiry man named Harold. "Is that legal?" "It doesn't need to be legal," Loretta snapped. "It needs to be untraceable." She scanned the room, then lowered her voice. "If we get desperate, we'll start issuing nuisance citations. Hit them where it hurts. Pile on the pressure until they drop it." A silence followed. Then Harold mumbled, "You can't just weaponize code enforcement." "I've done it before," she said. "And it works." We turned off the video. The room was quiet. Janice sat back, her face pale. "I always thought she was just strict," she said. "Not like this." I uploaded the footage to a secure drive, then sent copies to both Marcy and the reporter. Within 36 hours, a news segment aired during the evening broadcast. HOA president accused of financial misconduct and abuse of authority. Footage played of Loretta rifling through documents, contradicting her own public statements, and, of course, stealing my wheelchair. The community erupted. People who'd ignored the petition were suddenly knocking on my door, asking where to sign. The next morning, Loretta made her move. I woke to the sound of hammering. Outside, 2 men wearing generic security uniforms were boarding up my ramp. I rolled out and shouted, "What the hell is this?" One of them held up a form. "Unsafe construction. Ordered by the HOA." "That ramp was built to ADA standards," I said. "You touch it, and you're violating federal law." The younger of the 2 hesitated. "We were just told to secure the area." "You're trespassing," I said. "Leave now, or I'm calling the sheriff." They left, but the damage was done. Half the railing was splintered. I documented everything. 2 hours later, a deputy arrived with a warrant for Loretta. The charges were serious: theft of medical equipment, tampering with surveillance, destruction of property, falsification of HOA records, and obstruction of ADA access. I watched from my porch as they placed her in cuffs. Loretta didn't say a word, but her eyes scanned the neighborhood with a kind of desperate disbelief, like she couldn't comprehend that her fortress of petty power had crumbled. She was released on bail the next afternoon, but the damage was irreversible. The board called an emergency session this time, open to residents. A crowd packed the community center, the air thick with tension. Marcy stood beside me as I presented the final evidence: refund checks, security footage, voice recordings, and a summary of every violation of law and HOA charter. When I was finished, the room was silent. Then Harold stood up. "I move to remove Loretta Danvers as president of the HOA, effective immediately." The motion passed unanimously. Then came the second vote. Do we support Isaiah Preston's petition to initiate a full board re-election? A sea of hands rose. I didn't expect what came next. Several residents approached me afterward, not just to congratulate me, but to ask me to run. "You've already done more to protect us than the board ever did," said a woman in her 60s. "We need someone who understands boundaries." I didn't agree at first. I wasn't looking to be in charge. But something about the way the community had rallied, how people had come together not out of fear but solidarity, it stuck with me. So, I submitted my name. 2 weeks later, I was elected president of the Willow Heights HOA by a landslide. And the first thing I did? I returned every uncashed refund, personally. The second? I shredded the decor approval paperwork for accessibility installations and replaced it with a single line: "No resident shall be denied reasonable accommodations under federal or state disability law." And the third? I had a new camera system installed, one that didn't just watch my property. It watched the boardroom, too. The first board meeting under my leadership lasted over 3 hours and ended with the room applauding not for me, but for each other. It wasn't about replacing Loretta with another dictator. It was about the neighborhood reclaiming itself. People who hadn't spoken in years sat together, passed notes, exchanged phone numbers. For the first time in a long while, Willow Heights felt like a community, not a monarchy. 3 weeks after the vote, I received a formal notice from the state attorney general's office. They were opening an investigation into the former Willow Heights HOA leadership, citing probable cause for embezzlement, civil rights violations, and destruction of protected documentation. Loretta wasn't just facing fines anymore, she was looking at possible prison time. Meanwhile, I was drowning in boxes. When Harold stepped down from the board, he claimed stress-related vertigo, though I suspected it was guilt. I inherited his filing cabinet. It was stuffed with invoices, handwritten notes, and USB drives. One of them was labeled Vendor Accounts Private. That one changed everything. The files inside revealed a pattern. The HOA had been funneling payments to a landscaping company called Green Horizons, which, on paper, was responsible for common area maintenance. But the address listed didn't exist. Worse, the payments were excessive, over $15,000 per quarter for a single median strip and the small park near the tennis courts. I brought it to Marcy. "This isn't just padding numbers," she said, scanning the invoices. "These are fake vendors. Someone's siphoning funds through shell companies." She cross-checked the tax ID numbers. One of them traced back to a P.O. box rented under an alias, L. Dawes. Loretta Danvers was using an alias to cash HOA checks, Marcy said. And based on this, she's been doing it for at least 4 years. I contacted the State Financial Crimes Task Force. Within days, they assigned a forensic accountant to trace the transactions. What they found was worse than we imagined. Loretta had created 3 shell companies and used them to divert over $200,000 from HOA dues into personal accounts. We called an emergency town hall. I didn't speak first. I let the forensic accountant, a soft-spoken woman named Dana Chen, walk the community through the findings. She didn't use jargon. She showed graphs. Red lines for stolen money, green for legitimate expenses. When she revealed the total amount missing, the room went silent. A man in the 3rd row stood up. His voice was steady but low. That money was supposed to fix the sinkhole near the dog park. My daughter fell into it last summer. Another resident raised her hand. We've been paying for security patrols that never show up. Was that fake too?
Donna nodded.
The security company billed the HOA monthly, but the registered business license expired 3 years ago. Murmurs turned to shouting. I stepped in only to restore order. "We're pursuing criminal charges," I said. "And we're filing a civil lawsuit to recover stolen funds. Every dollar she took, we're going to get back." A woman near the exit turned and left before the meeting ended. Her name was Denise Caro. She had served as the HOA's treasurer under Loretta for 2 years. The next morning, the police knocked on her door with a search warrant. They found 3 HOA laptops, a box of shredded financial records, and a burner phone with encrypted messages between her and Loretta. Denise tried to claim she was just following orders, but the DA wasn't buying it. That same week, Loretta's face appeared on the evening news again, not for her previous arrest, but for her indictment. 6 felony charges.
Wide fraud.
Conspiracy. Obstruction of justice. 2 counts of elder financial abuse because 2 of the residents she'd stolen from were over 70 and living on fixed incomes. She was processed and denied bail this time. I should have felt vindicated. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd only seen the tip of something deeper. A few nights later, I got a knock on my door after dark. It was Theo again. He looked shaken. "I need to show you something," he said, holding a worn manila envelope. Inside were photos, dozens of them. He'd taken them over the years while working maintenance. Some showed Loretta meeting with contractors behind the clubhouse, handing off envelopes. Others showed unlicensed workers doing electrical work without permits. But one photo made my stomach drop. It was of a garage in the maintenance shed. Inside, stacked wall to wall, were dozens of mobility aids, walkers, crutches, shower chairs, and at least 3 wheelchairs. "She told me to keep them here," Theo whispered. "Said they were abandoned items from property violations." But I always wondered. He didn't have to finish. Residents with disabilities had been cited for leaving equipment outside equipment that then mysteriously disappeared, supposedly confiscated per HOA policy. But there was no such policy. Loretta had been taking them and storing them out of sight like they were garbage. We brought the photos to the DA. 2 more charges were added to her case: violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act and unlawful seizure of medical equipment. The city responded swiftly. A task force was dispatched to Willow Heights to audit every HOA policy, every enforcement action taken over the last 5 years. They found a systemic pattern of discrimination, especially against elderly and disabled residents. Fines were applied unevenly. Appeals were either lost or ignored. In one case, a woman was fined for installing a chairlift on her porch, then charged again when she tried to remove it. The city filed an injunction. No HOA action could be taken without oversight moving forward. And a judge ordered the immediate return of all property stored in the maintenance shed. We held a community redistribution day. Residents came to claim stolen items. One man cried when he saw his mother's walker. Another found the custom wheelchair cushion he'd saved up for over a year to buy. Word spread fast. Local news outlets picked up the story. Then state outlets. Then national. Reporters camped outside my house. A producer from a major talk show emailed me about sharing the journey of neighborhood justice. But I declined. It was never about becoming a symbol. It was about removing rot and rebuilding something better. I focused on transparency. We installed an online portal where every resident could see HOA spending in real time. We opened maintenance requests to public tracking. And we made one rule above all others: no policy could supersede the dignity or rights of a resident. 3 months after Loretta's arrest, the trial began. I testified on the second day. So did Theo. Janice, the veteran who'd been fined for his flag. Multiple residents took the stand, each with their own story of being silenced, fined, or manipulated by a woman who believed the HOA charter gave her power above the law. Loretta didn't speak in her own defense. Her lawyers tried to paint her as misguided but well-intentioned. But the jury didn't buy it. She was found guilty on all counts. The judge ordered restitution to the HOA and the full amount stolen, plus damages. She was sentenced to 8 years, with no chance of parole for at least 4. When the verdict was read, no one cheered. No one clapped. We just nodded. Justice had been served, and for the first time the neighborhood felt quiet. Not the kind of quiet that comes from fear or control. The kind that comes when no one's watching you through their blinds. When you can hang lights on your porch without worrying about a citation. When kids can draw on the sidewalk and neighbors wave instead of whispering. 1 week after the sentencing, our board met to draft a new charter. We added a clause that allowed for immediate community votes to remove leadership if unethical behavior was confirmed. We eliminated fines for non-structural issues. And we created a rotating committee of residents to review every enforcement action taken. No more unchecked authority. No more secret meetings. And definitely no more Loretta. 3 months after Loretta's sentence, Willow Heights was almost unrecognizable, not in appearance, but in attitude. The clipped hedges and uniform shutters were still there. But the fear? The constant second-guessing before putting up a wind chime or repainting a door.
Gone.
We were free. But freedom had a cost, and it came in the form of the final audit. Marcy called me one afternoon while I was reassembling the mailbox posts the previous board had condemned for being too creative due to the small brass eagle I'd added. The IRS flagged something, she said. It's not just embezzlement. It looks like tax fraud. A big one. I set the wrench down and sat back in my chair. How big? They filed the HOA as a religious nonprofit for 3 years. Claimed it was a faith-based stewardship organization. That's not even a real thing. It is technically, Marcy said. But only if it actually functions as one. They used that status to avoid state audits and property taxes on the clubhouse. How did no one catch that? They listed the clubhouse as a community chapel. Said it hosted interfaith gatherings and community prayer services. There was even a fake website. Let me guess, I said. Loretta built it? Domain registered to L.DAWS. I wheeled into my office and pulled up the HOA's financial archives. Sure enough, tucked between lawn care expenses and pool maintenance was a line labeled Spiritual Enrichment Materials. Over $5,000 allocated annually. When I clicked on the receipts, they were just bulk orders of blank journals and candles, none of which had ever been delivered. Marcy didn't hesitate. She filed an immediate report with the Treasury Department. Within days, a federal investigator named Agent Terrence Malloy contacted us. He was tall, with a quiet, deliberate way of speaking, like every word carried paperwork behind it. He met us in the newly renovated HOA office, which now doubled as a community library and legal resource center. After looking through the documents, he turned to me. This isn't just about tax evasion. If these funds were laundered through a fake religious entity and redirected to personal accounts, it's a federal crime. And if HOA dues cross state lines through automated billing systems, we're looking at wire fraud on a national level. Marcy nodded. We also discovered that several of the fake prayer meetings were listed on official HOA newsletters. Malloy raised an eyebrow. Did any of them actually happen? Only once, I said. And it was just Loretta, standing in the clubhouse lobby with a scented candle and a folding chair, pretending to meditate. He exhaled slowly. This is going to the U.S. Attorney's Office. Within a week, a subpoena arrived. Every current and former board member from Loretta's tenure was named. Denise, the former treasurer, had already agreed to testify in exchange for leniency. But the others? They lawyered up. The trial was scheduled for early spring in the federal courthouse downtown. I was called to testify again, this time not just about the stolen wheelchair or the manipulated citations, but about a full-blown financial conspiracy. The courtroom buzzed with tension as the prosecution laid out the case. Loretta and her inner circle had fabricated a religious organization, funneled HOA money through it, and used it to shield themselves from audits while pocketing tens of thousands in fraudulent reimbursements. They used HOA funds to pay for spa memberships, flight upgrades, even a luxury cruise marketed as a spiritual retreat. The worst part? They charged the community double dues during those years, claiming reserve fund emergencies. I had to sit through the footage of Loretta leading a faith-based landscaping ceremony, which was just her walking through a rose garden with a Bluetooth speaker playing Gregorian chants. It would have been laughable if it hadn't been so disgusting. By the second week of the trial, the jury looked visibly disgusted. The defense tried to argue that the spiritual organization was real, just loosely defined, but a former board member cracked under pressure and admitted the entire thing was Loretta's idea. She said it was a loophole, he mumbled. Said the government doesn't question religious spending. The verdict came quickly. Guilty on all counts. Loretta received an additional 10-year federal sentence to be served consecutively with her state time. Several of her accomplices were sentenced to between 3 and 5 years. Denise received probation and community service after turning over the last of the financial records. Willow Heights was awarded restitution through a federal recovery fund. We used the money to eliminate dues for the next year and rebuild the community park that had fallen into disrepair. A portion of the funds was set aside to create a legal defense pool for residents so no one would ever feel threatened or powerless again. But there was one last thing I had to do. The wheelchair she stole? I'd kept it. It had long been replaced by a newer, more comfortable model, but I couldn't bring myself to throw the old one out. It sat in my garage, a cracked wheel and all, like a relic of a battle fought and won. So I donated it to the local museum. They were opening an exhibit on community resilience, and when I told them the story, they set up a small display titled, "The Chair That Changed Everything." The plaque read, "Used in the fight against abuse of power in suburban governance. Let this chair remind us, no one is above accountability." On the day of the exhibit opening, a group of Willow Heights residents drove down together. We stood in front of the display. Theo, Janice, Mr. Gutierrez, Lydia, and the veteran whose flag had once been threatened, all of us changed in our own way. A reporter asked if I saw myself as a hero. "No," I said. "I saw a woman rolling away with my dignity, and I decided she wasn't going to keep it." Back at Willow Heights, we held our first official community festival not approved by a board, not enforced by a committee. Just neighbors, barbecuing, laughing, and playing music. Kids chalked the sidewalks.
No one stopped them.
Flags flew from porches. No one complained. And my ramp, we painted it bright blue. Not to match the trim, but to stand out. A reminder. Because in a neighborhood built on silence and submission, one act of defiance had started a revolution. And we weren't going back.